Everybody's hopefully good with them so that we can learn a lot today. Thank you, and I'd like to introduce Luke Zastro.
Thank you. Thank you. Those small modular reactors have been proposed as a potential energy option for the Upper Peninsula to meet current and future demand. Today's chat will explore what nuclear energy from SMRs can mean for residents and all of us in the region. We have two wonderful speakers today, which I'm so happy that they answered my call to speak today because they're wonderful. So Dr. Molly Kleinman, in the upper picture here, serves as the Managing Director of the Science, Technology, and Public Policy Program. In this role, Dr. Kleinman oversees the day-to-day management and provides strategic direction for this program. She brings over 15 years of experience across several areas of higher education, which much of her work centering on educational technology, access to information, and intellectual property. Dr. Kleinman received her PhD in higher education policy from the University of Michigan Center for the Study of Higher and Post-Secondary Education. She also received her master's degree in information from the University of Michigan School of Information and her bachelor's degree in English and Gender Studies from Bryn Mawr College. Dr. Denia Djokić is an assistant research scientist at the Fastest Path to Zero initiative. And currently, Dr. Djokić is also a 2021 Levnick Resident Scholar in Sustainability Leadership at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Dr. Djokić assists the Fastest Path team in grounding approaches to zero carbon energy system deployment in principles of social equity and environmental justice. She provides expertise and guidance in engaging with stakeholders and communities potentially impacted by the deployment of advanced nuclear energy technology. Dr. Djokić holds an MS and a PhD in nuclear engineering with a designated emphasis in energy science and technology from the University of California, Berkeley, where she was a U.S. Department of Energy Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management Graduate Student Fellow. That is a lot of stuff. She also holds a bachelor's in physics from Carnegie Mellon University. So please join me in welcoming Drs. Molly Kleinman and Denia Djokić. So how would you like to begin our little programs today? I think we talked earlier that you would give us a presentation and we would have a question and answer section after that. So in the end.
Yes, that sounds, we're having some connection issues, I think. So your audio is coming through to, are you hearing us okay?
You're perfect.
Okay, great. So that are you gonna kick us off?
I think so, but I think you're gonna
I'm gonna
share the slides, right?
Yes. Yep.
And in the pulling them up, I just want to say on behalf of both of us, Luke, thank you so much for the kind introductions, and thank you to everyone today. And we're very sorry we can't be there in person. We just couldn't make it work logistically for now, but hopefully maybe another time in the future. And so yeah, we've prepared some slides for you. I think what we'll do is we'll just go through the slides, give you a very high-level overview of our co-authors published last November, and then we can focus in on specific questions that you have in the Q&A session. And I think if the audio issues figured out then, but if you can hear us fine right now, we'll just focus on like the information, the one-way information download, and hopefully the internet will have stabilized by the Q&A.
We can potentially take questions in the chat too. So I'm so sorry, I'm going to share the screen.
No worries.
I'm on a new computer and there's some settings I have to fix. So I actually have to leave Zoom and I'll be right back. So be right back.
Okay.
I could also, well, okay, I'll let you do that, Molly, just in case.
Okay. Oh, but I'm the host. So if I do that,
you're
wait,
the
here we
host.
go. I'm gonna leave the meeting and someone else will become the host.
Okay.
I'm ending.
Okay.
I could also potentially,
I'm not familiar. I was going to go to the chat here. Let's see.
about 15 minutes ago, but I've solved them since, so I think I can
Because you're not the.
just
that
do
many,
it.
Maybe.
1 second to see if.
All right.
Hello again.
Molly, while you were gone, I offered, since I had fixed my video issue, I could, if you can't figure it out, I can also.
This should do the trick. I'll try one more time, and then if it
I
doesn't
just
work.
called you. No, I don't want to do that.
Okay.
Oh, but now I'm not host anymore, so you need to
No,
turn
you're
My audio. I'm
not.
trying to make mute my audio. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, one more time. Here we go. You seeing what I'm seeing? Yes, I get a thumbs up. Okay, terrific. Great. So I think we're good to go.
Yeah. Okay. So welcome to the very, 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 very condensed version of our very, very, very long report through which Luke found us. The report is called The Reactor Around the Corner, Understanding Advanced Nuclear Energy Futures. We won't tell you too much today about how this collaboration came about, but I think the bottom line that is important to transmit to you is that I am in the nuclear engineering department at the University of Michigan, and Molly is in the Ford School of Public Policy, also at the University of Michigan. And we found each other and said, well, Molly, I think you're gonna go a little bit into this, but the STPP program that Molly is about to talk about had this amazing methodology to assess emerging technologies. And me being a nuclear engineer said, oh my gosh, there are all these new reactor designs that everyone's talking about in the nuclear energy world. Can we please apply your methodology to the nuclear emerging technologies and see what that looks like and kind of just delve into it? And we found some funding, and we managed to do 2.5 years of solid research in this methodology that Molly's about to tell you about. And the result is this report, and we hope that it sparks some good discussion for everyone. So Molly, do you want to
Yes.
tell us?
Sorry. Thank you. I'm sorry that I advanced the slide a little too quickly. But hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you. So yes, as Denia was saying, I'm the managing director of the Science, Technology, and Public Policy program at the Ford School of Public Policy. We have faculty affiliates from all over campus, including Denia. We define science and technology really broadly. So lately, I feel like I'm talking about AI all the time. But it also includes things like climate and energy and work like the project we're going to tell you about. It also includes things like healthcare and biotech, and even things like transportation and urban planning fit under this big science and technology umbrella, which means we have a lot of opportunities to look at things across multiple disciplines and start to draw connections that can be difficult to draw for folks who are sort of staying in their one container of focusing on just one area of research. In our center, we have education, research, and policy engagement work that we do, and those things all connect with each other. So the students in our educational programs are also often the research assistants on the projects that we do, including this one. And they're also very involved in the various kinds of community engagement that we do, where we really try to hear about what are the science and technology policy questions and concerns facing members of various communities across Michigan and increasingly across the country, and what are the kinds of things we can help produce for them in order to be able to engage on policy questions. And so this technology assessment project, while it comes really deeply out of the research area of work that we do, we're really excited to be starting to think about policy and community engagement questions. What can we take from this project that folks can then use in their own communities as they're asking questions about things like what would an SMR mean for us, and how can we make sure that we are getting the best out of it and avoiding some of the worst. Dania, I think I'm going to let you talk about the team.
Yeah, I want to talk about the team. Mostly, I just want to show off how amazing everyone on this team was. And I'm sorry that the pictures didn't fit. So we just took a kind of a silly picture from the Department of Energy doing very hardcore radiological work which is actually not what our day-to-day looks like. We just did computer and keyboard research, but wishful thinking someday. So mostly to tie back to what Molly was just saying about STPP's student researcher ecosystem, our student research assistants were Nora Lewis, who was a public policy student, Chai Sibley, who just graduated with a PhD in material science and engineering, Nicholas Stubblefield, who was in my department, nuclear engineering, and Michael Redmond, who was in climate sciences, actually, climate and applied sciences, I think.
Space
His
in there too.
department. Space, yeah, there's a very long name in his department. So, and our other missing co-leader in the senior part of the research team, Shobita Parthasarathi, is not here at the moment. She's on sabbatical this year. So this project was very generously funded by a combination of the Sustainability Institute, the Graham Sustainability Institute at the University of Michigan, and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. The Michigan Memorial Phoenix Project, which is I won't spend too much time on it, but it was also involved in giving us funds to support this research, and we're all very grateful. Molly, did I forget anything about the research team?
No, I think you got
No?
everything.
Okay. All right.
So we wanted to talk about what the goal of this report, this project and this report was, which really was about helping communities get nuclear right. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the other technology assessment projects that we've done just to help understand the method. And sometimes we look at a technology and we come away saying, no, absolutely not. Facial recognition technology in schools is an example of one where it was like we were really alarmed by what we saw as the implications. And then in a project like this, while we did identify a lot of potential harms and challenges with advanced nuclear energy, we want to help create a safe and productive future that includes nuclear energy. But in order to do that, we really need to be clear-eyed about the risks and harms of the technology. So in order to, sorry, to understand the likely impacts, we want to make sure we're not repeating past mistakes. And also, it's really the case that the promises of this technology, and there are a lot of them, I think Dania is going to talk about them on the next slide, will not fulfill themselves without robust governance frameworks. So some of those policy pieces in place to ensure that communities are getting what they need. And so that's sort of the framing that we're bringing to this project that we wanted to make clear to you all, because so often when people are talking about a really new technology, they may be really excited about it, really boosting it, and it can be hard to know, are they working in this field? Is there money involved? For us, there's no money involved. But we're also not total haters. We're not, trying to scare anyone. We really want to help provide what we believe to be a more balanced perspective on the technology.
Thanks, Molly. And before we can get into more details about what the research study found, I, as the nuclear engineer, will now get on my little lectern and give you a very mini lecture about what the technology that we're talking about actually is. And I am sure there will be many, many questions about this, and I am more than happy to dig much deeper into this in a Q&A or potentially a future session, because this is a very kind of technically complex and even politically complex landscape. But just for the purposes of our conversation today, I'm going to give you the broad brushstrokes of what it is we're talking about when we talk about small modular reactors. And you may have already noticed that Molly and I, even just in the last 4 slides, have been using the term advanced nuclear energy and small modular reactors kind of interchangeably. And that's sort of on purpose, even though it's not technically correct. And that's where I kind of go, you know, it depends on so many technical details, and there are a bunch of technical specifications that make one advanced reactor design or sorry, see, I already did it. One reactor design advanced, or and not a small modular reactor, or a small modular reactor, but not technically an advanced reactor. And don't worry about what this means. My point with saying this is mostly that these categories are blurry, and um, this infographic that you see on the slide here is our attempt to make it a little bit more legible, but once you dive under the hood, it's not three, or in this case, four. We actually have this top one. I don't have you can't see my mouse, right? And I am not in the room. I don't have a laser pointer. So I'm pointing to the very top one, the blue and yellow reactor. That is technically two different categories, but also doesn't necessarily have to be. The point is that for the purposes of our talk, it was, or even for our report, it was easier to categorize these as three different types of reactors according to their size, or rather power output, because in one way the categories get blurrier, also that the industrial area of a small modular reactor that everyone's talking about can actually be very close to a large nuclear reactor that we have all across the country and the world right now. All right, that was a very long preamble to just telling you that we are generally working with a rule of thumb definition of the tiniest of these new reactor designs being a microreactor. So something that can fit on a truck, that is very transportable. You can kind of just ship it to a remote area and plug it into a local grid and run, let's say, a mining operation that's remote and not connected to the grid. Sometimes people count microreactors as under the broad umbrella of small modular reactors. For the purposes of our report, we kind of use them interchangeably and specify where we mean microreactors, where it's relevant to talk about microreactors. But sometimes when we talk about, for example, uranium supply chains, it doesn't actually matter which reactor we're talking about, because they all use uranium for their fuel. So then we have small modular reactors, which their technical cutoff is they have to be 300 megawatts in capacity or less. So about a third of a conventional large nuclear reactor station of today's nuclear reactors. About the size in terms of capacity of a wind farm, perhaps, depending on the wind farm. And these small modular reactors are, as I said, they're industrial areas, so all the supporting infrastructure could be pretty large, but the actual reactor is smaller than what we are familiar with right now. And then in the large nuclear reactor category, we have the conventional reactors that have been around since the 50s. But there are also large nuclear reactors that have advanced technology. So there are advanced nuclear reactors that are very big, both in output and in size. Again, I'm saying this with a little bit of hesitation because the categories get really blurry. There are currently about 70 or so reactor designs out there in the world right now, not in physical form. Not many of them have started to be constructed yet. But in terms of design, so paper reactors, there are so many reactors that they kind of all blur into each other, and this is kind of an attempt to make some sense of them. But the next slide will maybe, Molly, could you, thank you. The next slide will maybe illuminate a little bit better as to why we are so focused on small modular reactors in particular, and advanced nuclear energy more broadly. So I should preface the slide by saying we the current reactors are running on what's called light water reactor technology. And I won't go into too many technical details about that, but basically what you need to know is that um, both coolant and moderator, which is a thing that regulates a material that regulates the neutrons so that we can get a sustained fission reaction so that we can, from the uranium fuel, so that we can make electricity without anything, like just a baseload firm energy source. The current reactor designs run mostly on water. Some of them have graphite moderators, but that's mostly in Eastern Europe or sort of ex-Soviet Union. But in the United States, we run on light water reactor technology. Canadians run on heavy water. Excuse me, heavy water. That's a hard word for me to say. Heavy water technology, but it's very similar in design. So as you all are probably aware, the last several decades of the nuclear industry have been fraught with controversies. So we have seen severe nuclear accidents in power plants. First was Three Mile Island in this country, then Chernobyl in the Soviet Union, and most recently Fukushima, where there were 3 core meltdowns at a 6-reactor power station. That was 15 years ago now, which is crazy to imagine. It feels much more recent than that. And yeah, so the safety aspect, the safety track record of the global nuclear industry has been quite controversial. Then there has been an everlasting problem of what do we do with the waste? There has also, the nuclear industry has also been plagued by cost issues. It's very, very, very expensive to build upfront to build a large nuclear reactor. And recently, there have been multiple cost overruns with some of the more recent plants that have been built in the United States. And then, of course, lastly, I'm kind of jumping around, but I'm reading the first 4 sub-bullet points here. There has been the age-old problem of nuclear technology is a dual-use technology. Or nuclear energy is a dual-use technology. So anywhere where you can split the atom to make a lot of energy, like you will always have a double-edged sword where you can use this for military applications. And in fact, as all of you know, nuclear energy was born out of war, right? World War II. I'm sure many of you have seen the Oppenheimer. Who's seen Oppenheimer in the room? Yeah, okay. So I see many hands. Exactly. So I don't need to give you any kind of history lesson. So and the reason that I mention this is because this is something actually that our report does not engage with because it is so big and there's a whole sort of global ecosystem that is built to manage nuclear material and divide the civilian and the military applications of nuclear material that our report adds to that. It doesn't try to replace that. So if you would like to have a conversation about the proliferation aspects, we can have that sort of outside of the findings of our report. So with that, and I know I'm being long-winded, but this is because I'm an engineer at heart and I just love talking about this. I'll get back to what advanced nuclear energy and in particular small modular reactors, what they're doing on the scene with all these problems. So what they're promising is that they're going to fix all these problems from the last several decades of the nuclear industry. So with a redesign, or with 70 redesigns, right, there's this sort of ecosystem of competition of which design does what better. But by and large, small modular reactors promise to deal with the waste better, so to reduce the waste burden of nuclear energy. They also promise, because small modular reactors, with the keyword modular, because they're modular and can be kind of factory produced and assembled on site, that reduces the capital cost of building reactors. They also have, by and large, most new reactor designs that are out there right now address the age-old safety issues. So they have what's called more passive safety design features. So, for example, reactors that shut themselves down automatically and don't rely on human intervention, or pumps that rely on electricity, which is what happened in Fukushima. There was a loss of power that made the coolant pump stop working, and then you have an overheating core and everything melts down, right? And I don't mean to be dismissive about it. It was very serious, but I'm just kind of, if I go too deeply into that, then we'll be here for 3 hours. So yeah, and many of them also promise to solve the proliferation problem, in the sense that some designs, not all. This is actually an even more iffy promise, if you ask me. Some designs make it so that you can't separate fuel from the new type of fuel that a new reactor design uses. But in some cases, you actually have some reactor designs breeding more, so making more weapons grade fuel, which is definitely not something we want, but it just depends on the design. So the point here is that these new reactors, small modular reactors, and some microreactors, and some new advanced reactors, or advanced reactors in general of any size, solve all these old, or promise to solve all these old issues in order for nuclear energy to become a viable solution to these bigger political and ecological problems, such as the climate crisis, energy insecurity, and energy access, ever-growing electricity demand, which is now something that we are especially seeing with the explosion of AI infrastructure. And I think the reason we're all in the room today is because SMRs have been kind of tightly coupled in the political debate as a technical solution to the energy demand crisis that is being produced right now in real time by data centers. And we're going to unpack that a little bit, because it's not as simple as Molly said. It's not as simple, and you all know that it's not as simple as just making a promise and throwing a technical fix out of it. Turns out we can't necessarily engineer our way out of a problem. Spoiler alert. Um, and just a little bit before I finally stop talking and give you guys a break from my voice, I'm just gonna give you a bit of an overview of what's going on with these pictures here. The top left is a concept. It is not a real reactor. It's just a mock-up reactor of a small modular reactor a microreactor in buried underground and being run underground. It's an American-Argentinian collaboration by the company Nuclearis. The second picture, top right, is a mock-up actually of a reactor on a truck from the US Army. This was I forget which year this was from. One thing I forgot to mention, actually, that these new reactor designs, we call them new, but they have actually been around. Many of them have actually been around since the beginning of the nuclear industry in the 50s. They just never took off commercially. Light water reactors are the ones, for many historical reasons, are the ones that established themselves commercially and built out a very large global supply chain. Okay, and then the bottom picture is the first floating nuclear power station in the world. So it's a floating SMR. Actually, it's two SMRs on board. The Academic Lomonosov, and it is used to support remote communities in the Arctic and Russia. All right, I am done with the technical overview. Please, Molly, take it
Okay.
away.
Yeah, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the method that we used for this project. Because it's a bit unusual. It's a method that we've been developing at our center for several years. And we call it the analogical case study method, where we look for cases of previous technologies. The basic premise of this method is that often with very new, innovative, cutting edge technologies, the public narrative will be something like, oh, we can't possibly know what's going to happen, what the impact of this cutting edge thing is, and we don't want to stifle innovation. So we shouldn't regulate it. We should just wait and see what happens. And then once the technology is out there and we have identified harms that it is causing, whether it's some of the environmental harms we're seeing now with data centers or something like false arrests due to facial recognition, which is something that's been happening here in Michigan and elsewhere, then we hear, oh, no, 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 it's the cat's out of the bag. It's too late. We have to learn to live with it. And we reject that premise in STBP and in this work. And what we have found is that no matter how advanced and cutting edge a technology is, it always has things in common with past technologies. And we can draw on historical and contemporary research, news coverage, and scholarly analysis to develop cases and understand their impacts. And then draw on those to make some pretty good predictions about the implications of whatever the new technology is that we're studying. So when we look for cases, we are looking for similarity in either form, function, or potential impact, or some combination of those things. And then we start to identify patterns in how societies shape, engage with, and are shaped by technologies. So to give you an idea of what we mean and how we know these things, I think that's often a question when scientists are faced with social scientists. How can you know? And we know because we put together about 40 case studies for this project. And there were a lot of really clear patterns that we saw. And so we're just going to give you a few example cases to sort of see what we mean and then get back deep into the specifically the nuclear question. So the image you have here, a poster for Etna Dynamite. This was one of my favorite cases that we did. So we looked at the early history of dynamite as a technology. Um, Dynamite was developed to be a safer, more stable explosive that could be used in mining. So we have this example of a technology that's meant to be safer than its predecessor, that's framed around safety and control, but it's still an explosive. And what ended up happening with dynamite, so in these days, the late 1800s, early 1900s, there were frequently labor conflicts in mining. And the miners realized that they had at their disposal a safe, stable explosive that they could use as a weapon in their fight for safer working conditions, better pay, etc. And so we have this technology that turned out to be a dual use technology that could be both a weapon and a tool for mining, which is often about accessing energy resources. And so this pattern playing out around what a dual use technology looks like is how we came to look at dynamite as a case. And we've got a few more case examples here too. Denia, we didn't talk about what order we want to go in. Do you want to start with the Bali Raja Dam at the
Sure.
top?
Yeah, I'll start with the dam. And I'll also just say I had forgotten about dynamite when I said we don't engage with the dual use issue, which is a lie. I lied to you. We did do dynamite. Yeah, so we looked at a bunch of other cases. I forget the breakdown. A lot of them were US based cases, maybe about 50-50 US versus international. I'm not 100% sure yet. Here on this slide, we have 100% international cases, but if you go read the report, you'll see that that we do have a pretty balanced representation in terms of, I mean, not balanced internationally, but balanced between the US and non-US cases. And I will say we all learned a lot from these international cases, and because we were kind of able to draw out these higher level patterns. Ultimately, some of the cases didn't necessarily, Molly, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I feel like some of the cases it mattered that they were international, and they sort of informed our understanding of the geopolitical implications of new nuclear technology. And some of them really were just globally universal patterns that we saw that could be applied almost anywhere. So one of those cases, sorry.
I was going to say, I think that's right. And then also, I just wanted to note that the cases we're sharing with you today, we chose in part because they represent some of the issues that we think are going to be particular to you all in Menominee County. So they're not all, for example, so focused on water, but being located where you are, we drew on some of our water specific cases to talk about today.
Yeah, thanks, Molly, for
Yeah.
reminding us of that. So we actually, so the Baliraja Dam was one of the cases that we looked at. I will say we looked at about at least 3 dam cases, maybe 4. So dams being an energy infrastructure that is different from a nuclear power plant, but by the virtue of it being an energy infrastructure that is zero carbon, and also does have water management implications. We tried to see we chose various dam cases so that we could learn about various angles of that. And one of the things we learned from this case of the Baliraja Dam in Maharashtra, India, was how this is a story about how a community rallied together to address water shortage and inequitable water resource distribution issues, and built this dam, not the community itself, but there was a whole ecosystem of the community engaging with experts that were far enough away. I think they were in Mumbai. They were far enough away to kind of lend independent expertise. And there was another political group involved, an advocacy group that was advocating for a homegrown, community-centered energy infrastructure that would address the needs of the community. And so they designed the dam with community interests at the forefront rather than developer interests at the forefront. So we thought this was a really interesting, positive case of how energy infrastructure can be community-led, and how expertise can be, like technical expertise, can be mobilized in the favor of local interests and not private interests. Although those don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
So please read more in the report.
And I'll take sorry, Dania, I was jumping
Yeah,
in.
do you want to take the lithium ion batteries, and then I'll talk about Coca-Cola?
Yeah, so for the lithium ion batteries, here we have an energy technology that, similar to advanced nuclear, we're hearing promises of how lithium ion batteries are going to save us from the climate crisis, that they are this new and clean form of energy. They can replace internal combustion engines. They can be used to smooth out the variations in some of our renewable energy sources like solar or wind. And there's lots and lots of big promises about what lithium ion batteries are going to do for us. However, to get that lithium, we have to mine for it. So mining is a theme you'll see through some of our cases, because uranium mining is a sort of one of the often obscured features of nuclear energy, is that the uranium has to come from somewhere. And so does the lithium. And so we have an image here of a mining operation. Lithium mining is often very harmful to the surrounding environment, can be harmful to the surrounding people and communities where lithium is being mined. And often the people in the area around the lithium mine are not seeing the benefits of these batteries, either in terms of financial benefits or in terms of things like abundant free clean energy. So that's sort of the lithium ion case, and then I'll hand it back to you for the Coca-Cola bottling plant.
Thanks, Molly. And I'll just say that this picture is the lithium mine is, I think, from a mine in Bolivia. Yes, it is. But as you all might know, there's a whole area in that particular region of South America that's called the Lithium Triangle. So southern Bolivia, northern Chile, a little bit of Peru and Argentina as well, where there's a high indigenous population or high percentage of indigenous population that are mostly seeing environmental effects and not necessarily the ones that are getting the jobs. So our third case here on the slide, and again, this is just a very small sample platter of cases, just to give you a flavor of how we're thinking about this or what we learned from all these. In Chiapas, Mexico, there is a Coca-Cola FEMSA, which is the kind of subsidiary, the local subsidiary in Mexico, bottling plant that this was a very interesting case because it's a story, it's quite a negative story about the hogging of resources by a company, a large multinational company. And in this case, it was specifically water resources in a place where water scarcity is really an issue, and the indigenous population, or in general, rural and economically disadvantaged population is very high, and how local policies have made it such that access to resources for Coca-Cola FEMSA are a lot easier than for the local population, to the point that where Coke is safer than water because the access that the population does have to water is usually not the deep clean water wells, but sort of this shallow, more contaminated wells. So Coke ends up being cheaper, more accessible, and safer to drink than water. So the incidence of diabetes in the region is very, very high. So there were all sorts of knock-on effects that we learned about from kind of the original issue of inequitable water distribution policies or water access policies. Yeah. So, all right. So that was just the flavor of the kind of case research that we did. So we did this about 40 times, and I will also say that not all cases that we looked at are represented in the report, but we do have a case study library on the SDPP webpage that is about to go live, where you could read more about these individual cases, even more than in the report itself.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to talk now about the implications that we found from this case research for advanced reactors. So given all of these patterns that we have seen from all of these cases everywhere, what can we confidently say what can we confidently say is likely to happen in terms of societal impacts for advanced nuclear energy? Given that nothing changes. So if the world stays the same and we kind of, I don't want to use the word proliferate, but if we proliferate nuclear energy in this sort of new form, and if the nuclear industry expands, we can very likely draw some conclusions based on the very likely scenarios, extrapolating from the cases that we saw. And yeah, I think the next slide, Molly, thanks. This slide gives you essentially our chapter titles, or 5 chapter titles that represent the 5 big buckets of patterns that we found from our cases. So we found that advanced nuclear energy, again, under a business as usual scenario, is likely to make global disparities worse, so entrench global disparities, privilege private interests over the public good. I'm going to rephrase a bit just to spice it up a little bit. Already existing environmental injustices are likely to be intensified. New environmental injustices will also likely be introduced. Local and indigenous knowledge is not necessarily going to be consulted, like in the case of the Bali Raja Dam, unless you have specific impetus to do so. That's an important one, I think, for this community, and we can talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A. And then another one that's very important for all of you is promises around local development are not necessarily going to be kept. We did not see very many cases where there were lofty promises and they actually came to be. It's very easy to make promises, and it's very, very difficult to actually put them into action. So Molly will take us so these are the very, very high level implications that we found, and Molly will take us to what this actually means for you all, and do then ask us more questions about what these all mean.
Right. So this is a lot of words on the slide. I will work our way through and read as I go. So you don't have to try and read them all if you don't want to. But what does this mean for Menominee County? If the nuclear industry continues business as usual, the UP will experience the SMR industry intentionally prioritizing economic over public interest. So what that could look like in the specific instance of Menominee County, it may be a matter of pursuing tax breaks, for example, such that the state might be trying to encourage the nuclear industry to set up shop in the state without necessarily including policies that require benefits to the communities that are hosting these nuclear plants. And those benefits can look like a lot of different things. I think we talk about them a little bit more in the next slide, but the kinds of things that you might actually ask for. So we can see SMRs exacerbating environmental damage while claiming to mitigate climate change. This environmental damage may or may not be in the location that's hosting an SMR. That could be the environmental damage where the uranium is being mined. But there are also certainly concerns, especially around water sources, especially here in Michigan. We're already seeing a tremendous demand for data centers, not from the local communities, but from the data center developers who see Michigan as an ideal place to build data centers because we're more northern and therefore a cooler climate, and we're surrounded by so much fresh water that they want access to. And there's a lot, as Denia mentioned earlier, there's a huge interplay that we're seeing between the expansion of data centers and the demand for SMRs. Another potential way we might see environmental damage happening is when you build a new energy source, a power station, industries that need a lot of power want to be nearby. And so while the nuclear plant itself might not be creating environmental damage, it's possible that the chemical plant next door that's using that clean energy is creating new kinds of environmental harms. So those are some examples of what we mean when we talk about environmental damage. SMRs failing to provide local jobs and economic development for host communities, particularly for transitioning fossil fuel workforces. We looked at some cases of situations where there were programs that were meant to help people who had been working in the coal industry, for example, transition to a new industry. And what happened in those cases pretty consistently is that the programs were not particularly helpful. Very few, if any, of the local people were employed in whatever the new industry was. And we see this for these often when we talk about these sort of higher tech advanced industries, they bring people in to help get it set up and to help run it. And they're not creating a lot of jobs for the local community. And that's something that I think we're going to need to watch out for, especially because I know that's one of the big reasons why the state of Michigan is so excited about this. Michigan has been chasing new industries to help make up for the loss of the auto industry as a policy for many decades without a lot of success. And I think it's because we often keep repeating this kind of model where a new industry promises jobs for local people, but then they don't actually provide those jobs. Um, the SMR industry citing its riskiest infrastructure and jobs in marginalized and rural communities. So this is a case where not we've talked about safety, these systems are supposed to be safer. And Dania, you might want to jump in here on this with me. But not all elements of the whole cycle, the whole ecosystem of this technology are equally quote unquote safe. And there are elements that are riskier, whether that's the mining and processing of the uranium or features of the construction of the new systems. And there's a tendency to put those risky things out of sight of much of the public and in communities that already have less power, that are already more vulnerable to these kinds of exploitation and harm. And that is, I mean, rural communities are often marginalized communities. We talked about marginalized and rural, but this is one of those patterns that we see over and over again. Danny, I see you nodding a lot. I don't know if you want to jump in at
Yeah,
all.
I think you got it. I mean, I think just to put a like really hair splitty point on it is that what we don't want to kind of implicitly we don't implicitly mean the reactor, but and Molly said this already, but just to be very explicit about this, we're not talking about necessarily the reactor as a risky infrastructure. It can be, I mean, given that no system is 100% safe. But even when you assume, or even when you trust that these reactor technologies will be safe and will be fine and highly regulated, which is another actually a question right now with the current administration's rollbacks of the regulation that we can get into in the Q&A. Even when you put all of that aside, when you look at the entire nuclear fuel cycle, especially mining, that's kind of where you see these distributive issues and unequal sharing of the burden.
Yeah. And so then finally, the SMR industry undermining community engagement in SMR planning, siting, and operation, and failing to foster community self-governance of nuclear energy. So this goes back to the very first bullet. The nuclear industry is an industry. We've seen just a huge, huge wave of new startups and new corporate entities and existing corporate entities launching nuclear arms with the goal of making a profit, which is what companies do. And what we've seen in a lot of the cases that we've looked at is that in the drive for profit, these industries are unlikely to do the kind of community engagement that can get us to a more equitable, safer approach to nuclear energy, as we saw in the Bali Raja Dam, where the community was involved in every step of the way. There will be tremendous pressure from the industry not to do that, not to engage community, because it will slow things down and it might eat into their profits. And so that's one of the big areas I think to really push on, to say, if we're going to be the new home for this reactor, what do we get in return? And how can we be involved from the beginning? Because there is a lot of local expertise in terms of things like siting, for example. That's a location that floods every 10 years. This is a location where the spotted salamanders move through during their migration. Things that are not necessarily well documented that you need to talk to the people who live there to understand all of the details. I really want to see the spotted salamanders one of these days. I have not. Dania's nodding. I haven't gone yet. So then, and Dania, am I handing this back to you now for what we want in the governance framework?
Actually, I think this is you, but I'm happy
Okay.
to kind of
I can
jump
no,
in.
I can do this too, and you'll jump in. So, if we're going to move forward with nuclear energy, then we need governance frameworks, oversight policy frameworks that comprehensively manage safety and risk. So that comprehensively is really important from every stage of the process, beginning to end. Regulations that are considering safety and risk, which as Dania mentioned, we are currently in this country in a period of deregulation of nuclear. Shift financial risks from the public to investors and developers. A lot of nuclear development work comes out of various kinds of public-private partnerships. And often what that looks like in practice is if things go well, the company benefits, and if things go poorly, the taxpayer, is responsible for cleanup. So things like polluters pay models, where if things go wrong, if there's a problem, the company responsible has to bear the cost of it. Those kinds of systems can help induce caution from the industry itself, and also reduce the impacts, the harms on the public. Conduct inclusive and collaborative public participation at every stage of new projects. I feel like we've been talking about this a little bit already, so I won't go into too much more detail. Equitably distribute both energy and financial benefits to host communities. This one is huge. We saw a lot of cases where, as in the Chiapas example, this community that hosts a bottling plant is not getting access to the clean water that the plant is using, or a situation where there's an energy production of some kind, and the people living nearby are not getting access to that energy. They're paying high rates, sometimes even higher rates. And so, but it is possible to have systems where if a host community, the host community has to have access to the energy that's being produced cheaply or for free, and that if there are financial benefits, that they are also distributed to the community, and that can be in the form of jobs programs, housing programs. It can look like a lot of different financial benefits. I think there's somewhat famously in Alaska, everyone gets a payout from the oil industry. It doesn't have to be that straightforward, but it could be. And then finally, identify, repair, and remediate past harms. So we know the nuclear industry has done harm, both in terms of the very big and famous nuclear energy disasters, but also in the day-to-day in terms of things like mining. And it was very clear to us that in order to move forward as an industry, there has to be some attention paid to not just recognizing the past harms, but actually repairing them and making sure they don't happen again. And that's one of the big ways to build some trust between the public and the industry, is for the industry to demonstrate we're not going to make those same mistakes again.
Thank you, Molly. I don't need to jump in at all.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Please feel free to read our report. It is very, very long, but it goes pretty fast. You can ask Luke about it. He'll be a better judge about that.
Yes, I was blown away by your report. I really was. It's 183 pages long, I believe, but 41 pages of it are sources that you cite,
Right.
which is amazing. And if there's one question I have, could we start the question period here then? Do you mind?
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
stop the sharing. We can.
So I'm going to start with one question, and we're going to open up to everybody else. But I wonder if you could speak. You were talking about repair from past harms. Could you speak about the example of radium girls? That was one that really struck me.
Yeah.
Denia, do you
That's
want to
the hard
take this
one.
one?
I don't know.
I mean, I can start it, I guess. So
Yeah.
the case of the radium girls. So this was a case that we chose because it was about a radioactive material, right? That was the connection to the radium girls. So there was this huge boom early on, as people were discovering radium and the fact that it glowed and it had these really cool properties, where people were putting it in and on everything. And there was a company, I want to say it was New Jersey, that made watch faces with radium painted on it so that it would glow in the dark. It was like the first glow in the dark watches. And the people who painted the radium onto these watches were mostly girls and young women, mostly immigrants to the United States, working with zero protection from the radium. They were actually encouraged to put their paintbrush in their mouth between dips or between paintings in order to get that nice fine point on the brush. And as you might imagine, these girls and women started to develop really horrifying health effects from the proximity from consuming radium. And it was a tremendous battle for them against the company that employed them to get recognition that this is what was causing these illnesses, to get any sort of protection, and to get access to healthcare to manage the harms of the radium. Um, that's the high level story of the case. Dana, do you want to talk about the connections of it, maybe?
Yeah. Sure. Well, first I'll add just one missing element that has to do with during the litigation period, there is evidence of the company purposefully trying to deflect or accuse them. This is actually awful. This is hence my first reaction of like, I don't know if I want to talk about this case. This is a deeply upsetting case. They the US Radium Company, which is the company in question, um deliberately falsified or altered a report about the situation and tried to make it look like that the illnesses being developed by the workers were due to syphilis. So like all sorts of there, I mean, there are just layers in that, right? And yeah, falsely accusing them of that and also delaying litigation processes just to kind of um, let the sickness do its job while this is stuck in the courts, and then kind of having essentially, you know, death take care of some of these cases. I mean, this was an act like a deliberate move of these companies. So I think, yeah, the connection here, I guess, is quite obvious, and not that it's not that we can extrapolate necessarily a one-to-one. This was in the 1920s. Workplace protections have, improved leaps and bounds since then, and we do see a much healthier functioning corporate ecosystem with much better workplace protections, right? But it has been a century-long fight to do that. So it isn't necessarily the case that we will see this happen again, but I think it underlines the importance of keeping up those strong workplace protections and making them even better where they can be made better, and just kind of keeping our finger on the pulse about that.
Thank you for that scary story. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. We have another
Yeah.
question for you here. Go ahead, Joanne.
Okay, my son and daughter-in-law and their family had gone down to Arizona, and they went to Antelope Canyon, and they went on the tour, the bus tour, and it was
Beautiful.
guided by a young Navajo Indian man, and he had recounted to my family, and this was just 3 weeks ago, about how his whole family had been miners in the uranium mines, and they had no protections, and so their whole families and their offspring are dealing with the after effects from the 50s of their elders doing this mining. So I did notice that you had that in your report, which was really surprising for me because I just heard the story from my son and his wife. And the Navajo people didn't know, they didn't know it was uranium. And they needed work. They needed jobs. So they worked in there, and that's what happened to the Navajos. And that's where uranium probably is still being mined today, isn't it?
Yeah, it's being reopened. That industry is sort of
We
starting
have
to
another
be.
question over here, Larry.
Yes, is it safe to presume that the reactors on like aircraft carriers and submarines are examples of a micro reactors? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Figure out what's what in the full size differences.
I would say the aircraft carriers are more like SMRs and the submarines are more like microreactors
This was a
in
question.
their
So
power up.
I came to this project with really zero past knowledge of nuclear energy or anything beyond what you sort of absorb in the culture. And so that was one of my first questions too when we were talking, learning about these reactors as very new and advanced. I was like, weren't there nuclear submarines? Where do those fit? And so in fact, yes, some of these very small microreactors have been around for a really long time.
We have another question. How about in the front? Go
Oh,
ahead.
me?
Go ahead. Yes.
I was wondering about why is there still so much push toward the uranium fueled reactors rather than going with other fuels like thorium and so on, which don't have quite the same amount of radioactivity. They tend to be a lot safer. They're also not breeder reactors for weaponization.
Yeah, this has been an age-old question, and it is a very, very good question because technically it does make more sense, but very practically and economically it doesn't. There is no supply chain for thorium that makes thorium reactors make much economic sense. Even for India, which has very large thorium deposits, they have been sort of looking at developing thorium reactors for a very long time. Unclear whether it will ever take off, because the nuclear industry is such a globally integrated industry. Switching fuel supplies is quite difficult, and we see analogs in this in other energy industries, and it would take a lot because uranium is so cheap and abundant, and we've got all 400 reactors and possibly now even more that run off of uranium. The switch to it would just be very, very expensive, to build out these new supply chains and new economies.
We have another question. Natalie, you had your hand up.
So here in Menominee, we've been fighting off a massive sulfide gold mine for 25 years or more. Are there proven strategies for communities, you said, like our indigenous or marginalized or rural, that work against big money and big, whatever?
That's a great question. That is not a question we really dug into in this report, but I know that work does exist, in terms of what's effective, in fighting these kinds of interests. And I'm certainly happy to try and pull some together, separately from this. I think a lot of it is about building coalitions, building power across different groups that are affected. It certainly helps to be getting elected officials on board. And if they're not on board, electing new elected officials. Um, those are some of the things I'm familiar with just from my own work in other advocacy spaces. But that specific question of how do you stop one of these sort of big harmful environmental um, potential harms from something like a big mine. There is work out there. People have done research on this. Dania, it looked like you maybe had something to add.
I'm actually in real time looking at my mesoteric. I'm trying to find a paper that if I find it, I will share it. But there's actually been work on this at the Colorado School of Mines for obvious reasons by social scientists there that I think might be of interest to you. And this is kind of my own personal bias because I'm Serbian. There's been a recent very large mobilization against Rio Tinto, the company that is trying to mine lithium in Serbia right now, and it's been kind of successfully pushed back over the years. And you might be interested in looking into that case and kind of the social movements around that case.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add that we did include some social activism cases in the report. So we looked at Standing Rock and the fight against the pipeline there. We also looked in Atlanta at the Stop Cop City movement that was trying to stop the city from cutting down a forest to build a police training center as two examples of they're more cautionary tales about things to really like the way that things can be the activists and activism can be harmed and are likely to be harmed and controlled in these kinds of situations.
Millie, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. In Europe, nuclear energy is very heavily used, and it is clean and it is cheap in a sense. Naturally, the main concern is they have to be built safely. And that is a fear people have. And that's why you get so much objection about the nuclear energy. Now, you have to have a highly skilled team to work within the nuclear energies. Would small communities be able to provide you with those skills? Has there been research done? And the concern of the people are very serious and very good because you need to build them safe. That is a number one assurance we need to have.
Thank you.
That's all I have to say. I just believe it has to be built safe.
Absolutely.
And that we can trust that it is being done.
We have another question over here. Go ahead.
Do you think the state of Michigan is a good place to build a high level or a waste repository for the high level nuclear waste? And if not, why not?
Good question.
That's a very complicated question. It's so I was trained in nuclear waste management. So unfortunately, you just touched a very deep passion of mine that I'm more than if we were in the room, we would talk for hours after this event ends. But I think the unfortunate answer is it's complicated. It's not necessarily not a good place, but it's not the best place, geologically speaking. I'm also not a geologist, so don't, take this with a grain of salt. But we, in the United States and also the world's experience in trying to permanently dispose of high-level radioactive waste, mostly in this form of spent fuel, has the complications have mostly been social and political, and have surfaced questions of justice and equity in who is being told to deal with the waste with or without consent, and mostly without. In some cases in the world, like in Sweden and Finland, they had a consent-based process, and in Canada as well, to decide on their final waste repository. In the US, that has never happened under the Biden administration. We had recently started a consent-based process for an interim site to consolidate all the kind of de facto waste storage places, which are just the nuclear reactor sites, right, where spent fuel just kind of sits on a concrete pad and is not being put in a geologic repository or in an interim storage facility. So what I'm trying to say with that, I'm not trying to evade your question. I'm just trying to say, like, we have only recently shifted in the United States to recognizing that the issue is political. The geology is not secondary. It's still very, very important to have the technical and geologic parameters to make sure that we can isolate radioactive waste from the biosphere for literally millions of years, which is another conversation around, like, what is that even, right? It's really, really far in the future so far that no engineered system will last that long. But there are all sorts of ways that engineers think about an engineered geologic repository system that will make it last for as long as humanly possible, given the knowledge that we do have. And similar to a nuclear reactor, actually, it's a very complex system where you can tweak design parameters to make the certainty of what you're building, of whether what you're building is as safe as possible. And that can happen in theory in any geology. Not all. There are some really bad geologies, but Michigan's isn't. I don't know enough about Michigan's sort of geology to say for certain, but I do know that one of Canada's high-level waste sites, potential high-level waste sites that was under consideration at one point was just across the lake from us, right? Or from us, I guess, not from you guys, in Ontario. Sorry, too many lakes. And it was sort of it had been pre-selected because it wasn't necessarily the worst place in the world to put nuclear waste permanently. So that's kind of a proxy answer to your question. Is that satisfactory?
Thank you. I know, Susan, you have a question, and then Dale.
I just have a statement that the problems of the world are based on the individual who starts them and is selfish, and on corporations that fall into the same category.
Dale?
How do they decide where they're going to put an SMR, and is Menominee County a likely place?
That's a great question. So it sounds like part of why we were invited is because there's some interest among at least some of your political leadership to put an SMR in Menominee County. So on the political side, it sounds like there's at least some possibility and interest. But Denia, I'll let you talk about the technical side.
Yeah, I actually don't. Well, there were kind of two questions. I can't speak to the second question simply because I don't know enough about the political debate in Menominee County. But I would like to learn more from all of you. To your first question is, how did they decide where to put a reactor? Well, it depends on who they is, right? They can be the private-public partnership between the developer and the utility and the government, and potentially the developer and the utility deciding with I should leave the federal government out of this because it usually the partnership is usually just financial, and the siting decisions happen on the state level. Ideally, they should happen on a local level. Ideally, they should include municipal leadership, right? Or not just leadership, also everyone who lives in a certain locale. Ideally, there would be consultation. There isn't usually, but I think that's something that you as a community and county can advocate for.
Thank you so much. Just as an FYI, I'm holding in my hand a card that came in the mail this week is being sent to Menominee residents from Upper Michigan Energy Resources. They are preparing an integrated resource plan, IRP, which includes evaluating several resource alternatives and getting feedback from customers and stakeholders on where you'd like your energy to come from in the future. It does advertise customer meetings. In fact, there's one scheduled June 3rd here at the library in person at 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. But also there is a at uppermichiganenergy.com. You can go there and there's a survey. I took it this morning just to see what they were asking, noticing that they want customers to answer 11 questions ranking what's most important to them with their energy needs, affordability, reliability, whether it's renewable energy or not. And so they're seeking information, but ironically, most of the feedback is just your ranking without context and without information about what would be the positive and negative impacts of any of the choices that they give us. And so your talk today, coupled with this postcard that's being mailed to our residents, is really quite timely. And I guess after listening to you a couple days ago, when we talked to you before this meeting, I really started thinking about that. There is a comment section at the end of the 11 questions where you can comment and put everything. And I just wrote on there that, we don't have context. We haven't provided a document, a side document. And so just from what you've been able to share thus far, I want to express thank you to you, because it's so timely that you're talking with us about this. We've got to get ahead of it. So thank you.
Great. We're so happy to hear that.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. This has been really exciting for us to be able to connect with you all and start to hear about the way you're thinking about these questions.
We are so thankful for you and we appreciate it. Any other last comments, Luke?
I have a ton of questions, but we'll capture that in a later time, I think.
You should come up here in person. That'd be awesome.
You can try some of our pasties.
We'll take you kayaking.
Yeah,
We would love that.
Yeah,
maple syrup.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate
Thank
it.
you all for coming. Thanks for inviting us. And we hope to be able to continue the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. All right.
Bye all.
Bye. I'm the host, so I'm going to end this. I'll end the Zoom.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.